Hello, welcome to Yes, Learning the Language of Autism. And my name is Belle, as you already know. So, welcome and thank you for your subscribing to my channel over the last month. It's lovely to see my new members, and thank you for watching all my videos. I hope you're finding them useful and sharing them around. Sometimes they're good. I kind of see my videos as informative, but also like a starting point for a lot of people. It kind of like, I like the idea that they might just get people thinking in a slightly different way, and then you can kind of go off and research further and deeper, because I'm by no means an expert. This is me passing on my knowledge of my experience, and also from conversations that I have with other autistic people, both recent and throughout my life as a mum, to George, my autistic non-verbal communicator. So this month's video is about interoception sensory system. It's part 2. Last month we talked about toileting needs and eating and drinking and the sensations within the body regarding interoception sensory needs. This month's video is going to be, we're going to talk about hot and cold, inside and outside the body, and also about physical pain, both inside the body and outside the body, or on the body, should I say, from a kind of overactive and underactive perspective. So like I've said in my other video, with children and young people, if they are having issues of these subjects, it's always best to get them checked out for other medical conditions. I talk about what I talk about purely from the mindset that it is interoception challenges as the reasons why they have these difficulties. But it is good to get people checked out and make sure that their physical bodies are healthy and well. So I have notes over here like I always do. So if I look to the left here, that's why. I just like to keep my notes so I keep on track, because I veer off. Hot and cold. So this can obviously do with temperature, body temperature, and how we are receiving the information to our brains about I'm really feeling hot now and I need to take off my clothes or have a drink or get in the shade or do whatever it is that we do to help bring our body temperature down. And the same with feeling cold. Now, if there are issues around that sensory filter, then obviously depending on the child's age and ability and communication skills and abilities, and even an understanding of what is going on within their own bodies, obviously the younger the child, the less they're going to have experience within their own bodies. So they're not always going to know why they feel or don't feel the things that's happening to them. Sometimes they, even if they're verbal, they can't explain it. I even know, I know autistic adults that have a much deeper understanding because they've lived in their own bodies for however old, they are, but still find it incredibly difficult to actually describe or explain exactly what it is that's going on and what they're feeling. It's not always an easy thing to be able to explain to somebody else. So imagine if you have a child without any of those adult experiences. Don't be surprised if they find it incredibly difficult to be able to explain to you what is going on in their bodies, even if they are verbal and they can communicate through other means. They may not be able to tell you. So it's a real heightened awareness and a lot of observing and a lot of open-mindedness. I found as a parent to an autistic sensitive human being is that your mind needs to be wide open to all possibilities. It's not always the mainstream route of discovering what and the mainstream route of being, because our children are wired differently. So they are going to experience life both internally and externally differently. And that is the way it is. And different doesn't mean bad, different's just different. So hot and cold. To be unaware of what's going on to begin with, you may start seeing behaviours with the hot and cold temperature thing, like feeling faint, passing out, getting headaches, sometimes even vomiting, becoming lethargic, tired, cranky, physically getting very red in the face, or a bit swollen up, a bit puffy. All these things that can indicate that the body temperature has gotten too high. And I'm not talking like from having a temperature when you're poorly as such, but just when your body heat system is just overheating. So you need to kind of look out for those things and help your child cool down in the natural way. Also, the coldness, they may genuinely not feel physically cold until they are absolutely freezing, like freezing. So, their lips could be blue, their hands could be blue and purple, and their feet, they could have chilblains. And then they might start really shivering badly, like, that teeth chattering. But beyond that, when you're shivering so much you can't control it, it's just like big time. And that is often because that is when the sensory system of interoception kicks in. It kicks in if it's an underactive sensation or sense. That's normally when it will kick in, when it's like kind of almost at crisis point, So finding the early stages of feeling chilly, people without this condition will be like, oh, I'm getting a bit cold now, and you'll take action. Children with this issue won't be able to take action because they won't be receiving those messages into the body as quickly as someone without it. So just observing closely, looking, watching, and to help assist with that, I know from what I've read and what I've researched and what other people have told me is that occupational health therapists are kind of leading the way of being able to support people with these issues, and helping them to recognise those feelings and helping them become more in tune with their own bodies through different activities that they do, which I'm not going to get into because I'm not a trained occupational therapist, but from what I've read and what I've researched is like speak to occupational therapists and ask them if they're aware of these sensory issues, and a lot are now saying that they are. There are websites which I will put on here, links to, with loads more information on this subject and this condition and ways in which you can help, and organisations and there's lots of information. So please do research this further if you feel this is affecting your child or someone that's in your care or someone that you know who may find this information useful. So this can also, hot and cold is obviously to do with food that they're eating as well. So if they're unaware of it, they may not be able to tell when food is really, really too hot for them to eat. So they may burn their mouth, they may burn their fingers, they may burn the inside of their gullet as they're swallowing the food. They may do that with food that's too cold or not quite cooked or part frozen. There's loads of aspects to this condition that needs to be looked at carefully. So also, drinking hot drinks we've all done that. You know, we've all eaten something too hot when we're like, and we could normally end up spitting it out or get blisters in the top of our mouths. Now, if you haven't got that bit that kicks in and goes, hot, spit it out, do something about it, and they eat it, and then it's in their system, and then they may feel it when it's really in there, burning the inside of their digestive system. So it's really making sure that the temperature of food is not too hot, and pointing it out to them and saying, oh, we're going to let that cool down. Really not assuming that they know. And even if you've told them and explained it to them time and time and time again, it needs to be watched all the time until they are really experienced and have found strategies with support through therapy and other ways to really recognise and monitor the food that they eat and the temperature that it's being eaten, so that it is safe for them to do so. Also remember, if it's an overactive sensory system need, what isn't hot to somebody without it, and you'll be like, oh, that's not hot, it may be really hot to them or really cold to them, because they could have an overactive sense to that. So for example, George, my son, he is quite heat sensitive. So in the bath, I always run the bath for him, and I'm always checking the temperature. And in the early days of this, when I didn't realise, I think, oh, that's okay for, that's not too hot. George would get in and then he'd get out again, and it would be too hot for him. And to me, it really was warm. So now obviously he's 15 and I've got years of experience, and so has he, and we've worked together with it. I try and I've helped him lead the way, so he'll get in and he'll get in, and I say, is that okay? And then he'll just look at me and go like, that's his because he's non-verbal, that's his hot sound. And so I put more cold in, and then I say, how's that feel? So I'm helping him monitor his own body temperature in his own way, and that seems to be working really well. And I listen and I let him lead. So that's because he's very over sensitive to heat. Cold, not as much, but definitely heat. So that's an example of what is hot, warm, comfortable to me isn't comfortable to him. It's still too hot. So it's a really interesting one. It's the same with, so if they're going to touch something hot, like a hot radiator, some radiators get really, really hot. Hobs on your cooker, fire, not even touching fire, but getting close to a fire, when you're kind of like warming yourself up. If you get too close, you start feeling it burning your skin, even if you're not touching the flame. Be really mindful of that with young people and children, that it's over and above the kind of natural development age of where they are unaware of dangers of fire. It's gone over and above that age where they kind of start to understand that. It could be that they just genuinely cannot feel the heat, and before you know it, their skin's blistering. Or same in sun, if they're underactive and they're getting sunburn, they may not feel the burn of the sun, and then they may get sunstroke or sunburn. Same with the underactive, if they are or overactive, if they're really, 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 really sensitive. Being in the sun for 2 minutes could just be too much for them. What someone might say, oh, it's not that warm today, it's only 21 Celsius, fine, might be too hot for that person. So it's about really listening and honouring their needs and doing something about it. And if somebody complains or says it's too hot or it's too cold, but it isn't to you, it still needs to be listened to, however young that child is. Like, it's just really about no good saying, oh, it's not cold, like we often do with children as adults. We're like, oh, don't be silly, it's not cold, you're fine. It's like, actually, if they're saying, then they're not. You know, it's kind of like worth. And if they can't say and they can't express it, it's really keeping a close eye. And these things come, and you learn these things as you go, like I have. You really, really do. So it's really keeping an eye on, like George, as another example, you know, I'm looking over there because that's where the cooker is. So when we cook his tea, we cook tea, obviously in the oven, turn the oven off, the oven, outside the oven is still hot. He eats his food on the side near the oven. Every single day this happens. Every single day he feels the oven door and he feels the heat of it. He knows that it's hot. Every single day, because he's still experimenting with that and getting to know what that feels like. And I know that that's what he's doing at 15. He still pulls up his dressing gown and he puts his bare skin on the hot door, even though he knows it burns. It doesn't burn him to the point where he's in trouble or it's blistering him or burning his skin, but it's hot. But he still needs to do it. And he's becoming, like I'm sort of showing him, well, if you put the dressing gown back down and let that be a protection, then, oh, look, you can feel it, but it doesn't burn. So I'm helping him learn to monitor that. If he feels the need, he wants to experience the heat, but not to the point where it's going to mottle his skin or it's going to be like, ow, that hurt, you know? So it's slowly helping your children to own their own body system, really important for their growth and their well-being and their protection and their acknowledgement of their own body. It's really important that we really encourage children, autistic children, sensitive children, to be able to monitor their own body system. And for them to be able to do that, it means that the adults and people in their lives must listen and act on their wishes. That's what I have found, and it works really, 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 really well. So the other one I want to talk about is pressure on the body, like physical pain. Again, check them out with the doctor, make sure there's no health issues and they're not sick in any way, shape or form. That's really, really important. Don't just assume because they're autistic, oh, it's because they're autistic, they're sensitive. It could be that. It could be because they've got a sensory need, but it might be because they've actually physically got something that they need, you know, medical help for. So please don't fall into that trap, and don't let that be something that's just kind of like, oh, they're autistic. It's common for autistic people to get that. I hear that a lot from other parents, and challenge that. Don't just assume. But if they've been checked and their health and everything is fine, it could be that it is a sensory need. So physical pain, they may have an underactive message going through. So if they have broken a bone, cracked a bone, fractured a bone, I've heard this many times, it could go unnoticed. It can go unnoticed, and it has gone unnoticed, believe it or not. And for some it will go unnoticed if it's just a fracture, and if it's a break then and the pain is incredible, then it gets sort of recognised. So this is something to, again, be super aware of, be hyper alert to. If your child falls over and bangs themselves and they don't cry, or they don't show any indication of any pain, it could be because they haven't hurt themselves. Fine. But double, triple, quadruple check. Check that they're okay. Check that if they can't feel the pain, that there isn't a cracked bone or a broken bone, or, you know, a cut that's deep and needs like extra over and above the giving it a little clean with some tea tree oil and water and putting a plaster on it or something. Like, make sure that it's looked at properly, because just because a child doesn't cry, it doesn't mean that the body needs it to be, you know, assisted with. Also, if they're self-harming, quite often children can self-harm because they're trying to feel something, or they're trying to, it feels good and they might be really whacking themselves really, really hard, and it could be that they're not feeling it as much as maybe someone that didn't have that issue would. So it's bearing this in mind too. It's not to say, oh, just let them get on with it and whack themselves ridiculously to the point where they're knocking themselves out. But it might be that they're not feeling it physically as much as you would. But it still doesn't mean, like George used to headbang a lot. And although he didn't really feel the pain of the headbang, you know, his body, he's still his body, and the bruises and the lumps on his head would be huge. And it was a real issue, it was a real concern, because obviously there's only so many bangs to the head a head can take. So it's being super alert and super aware of these things. And this also comes in with the internal pain. So if they've got a tummy ache, if they've got a headache, if they feel sick, if they've got other things that go on with the body that needs assistance, they may not feel the pain of it and may not be able to tell you until it's a crisis point. So it's something that you look really closely at. This can also work with things like clothes and shoes, you know, and wristbands and all sorts of things that might be too tight or too small or too big and cause blisters, or, you know, belts that are too tight or shoes that are too small and they're pinching, and normally you can go, ow, that hurts. They may not be able to tell you that because they may not feel it, but then you might look at their feet and they'll be bleeding, or they've got huge blisters, or they've got like their arm goes tingly and blue because they've got a bobble on their arm and it's really too tight and they haven't felt it. That's a real common one. Seatbelts too tight, car seats too tight. So many things that we take for granted when we don't have that sensory issue, that our brains and our bodies and everything and the flow is going, oh, that's too tight, ouch, that hurts, why is that rubbing, why does that itch, why is that stinging, why is that hurting? If none of those things are happening, or the other way, if they're really, really, really oversensitive to pain, you know, what might be like a little donk, you know, like a little, like they've just knocked themselves very gently on a table or something and they scream in agony. And the parent will say, oh, come on, it wasn't that bad. Oh, look, you're fine. It doesn't hurt. It may well really hurt to them. Like, it may really hurt to them. Wearing shoes that are just slightly uncomfortable could be excruciatingly painful to the point where they just can't bear it. So being oversensitive to physical sensations can be incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly painful. So please, if your child indicates that, they're not making a fuss, just act on it, just accept it, and then you can start to monitor it much more closely, and then you'll get a feel for it, and then as they grow and develop, you'll find your way together and be able to help them manage it. So like I said before, occupational health are really good for these kind of issues. You know, letting them practice and have experience within their own bodies, using an array of language and visuals and slow learning together, like with hot and cold temperatures and baths and play and things like that are really good ways for you to help your child manage their own sensory needs in this particular subject. And also research it further and go on the websites and the Facebook groups that are run by autistic people and people with sensory processing issues, and ask questions and hear what they've got to say, because there's plenty out there now. Next month, which will be the last one of this series, I'm going to be talking about the emotional impact and behavioural issues and communications that can occur through having interoception issues. So that's going to be quite a big one. That's going to be quite a long video, like this one. You see, it's 24 minutes long, and I don't like them to go over half an hour. So I hope you find it useful. If there's any more questions, or if there's anything anybody wants to add in the comments section, or, you know, email me and all of that, all my information will be on the description box below this video. Of course, you can always subscribe and get alerts and become a part of the Daslius Learning the Language of Autism community, which I would absolutely love. I'm still learning, still growing, and the more information I get, the more I can pass on. So thank you for watching. Have a lovely month, and I'll see you all again in November. Bye for now.